The Fugitive Slave Act was one of the 5 major points addressed in the Compromise of 1850. Before the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793, which wasn't enforced, and the North had personal liberty laws that overpowered this one. This new slave law was made to make it easier for slave owners to get their property back. This act stated that it is now illegal to hide or help slaves in their journey to freedom. Now, everyone, even in states where slavery was illegal, had to contribute to the capture of free slaves. Slaves were not allowed to speak in their own defense, and there was no jury. There was no time limit, so slaves who had been free for years could be returned to the terrible life of slavery. Hiding or helping slaves came with a punishment. Anyone who is caught aiding a slave to freedom is charged with a fine up to $1,000 and 6 months in jail. Commissioners were bribed into having slaves returned, considering they received $10 for returning a slave and only $5 for declaring the slave free. Abolitionists were very offended by the Fugitive Slave Act and felt like they were being forced into contributing in slavery. Some abolitionists felt it was even more important to help the slaves on their path to freedom. The Underground Railroad became more active as slaves were fleeing to Canada. Even though most abolitionists chose not to protest violently, some chose to use violence, such as abolitionist Martin R. Denali. If a man approaches that house in search of slave, I care not who he may be. If he crosses the threshold of my door, and I do not lay him a lifeless corpse at my feet, I hope the grave may refuse my body a resting place, and righteous heaven my spirit a home. Anthony Burns was a fugitive slave. He worked in Virginia and ran away to Boston. When declared a fugitive slave, many abolitionists stormed the courthouse. One marshal was killed in the attack, but the protesters didn't come close to freeing Burns, and he was returned to Virginia to work as a slave again. Even though the fugitive slave law isn't around today, doesn't mean governments are enforcing laws against slavery. In an article entitled Iqbal Massa, it states that Iqbal ran away from slavery, and when he ran to the police, they brought him back to his work as a child laborer. The Fugitive Slave Act was a difficult time for slaves. Some African Americans were forced into slavery even though they weren't slaves before. The Compromise of 1850 accomplished what it set out to do. It kept the nation united, but the solution was only temporary.